So before I get into the details of Shadow, I want to talk a little bit about the web development workflow. So we have a pretty typical workflow set up here. I have my text editor here and I have my browser here. And if I want to make a change to this document I'm working on, maybe I want to change the background to a different color. So I'll make a change here, Alt-tab over to my browser and hit refresh, and I see the change. This is the kind of thing that web developers do thousands of times a day. It's the kind of thing that gets completely ingrained in muscle memory, and it's a pretty efficient workflow. If you want to get fancy, you can use something like LiveReload, which I have going here, and what that'll do is it'll actually update without me having to switch over to the browser and refresh. So now if I want to change the background color back, I can just save my document, and without tabbing over to my browser, it's automatically refreshed. So I'll go down here and maybe just add some exclamation marks here, save the document, and you see them right away. It's a really good workflow. It works very efficiently, and it's something that I think most web developers are pretty happy with. That is until you introduce mobile into the workflow. Okay, so what happens when you introduce mobile into the workflow? So if you're building a new website, if you're building something sort of modern, you're probably building it with mobile in mind. So how do you go about testing on mobile devices? The workflow changes quite a bit. So here's the document I was showing you before, and I'm going to go ahead and change the background like I did before, and hit refresh, and I can see the change here. Now I want to test it on my phone, so I pick up my device, and it's locked, so I have to enter my code here. And after I've entered the code, then I have to enter the URL, which I've already done, but that's a pain because it's going to be some long URL, and you're almost certainly going to make a mistake while you're entering it at some point. And then you go over here and you hit refresh, and you see your change. So then you put your device down and you pick up your next device, and here I have a tablet and a couple of phones, and you're going to go through the same thing. You're going to turn the device on, you're going to have to unlock it, you're going to have to possibly type in a code, you're going to have to type in the URL and hit refresh on each of these different devices. Meanwhile, while you're making a change, the screens are going to dim, and every time you want to check the change on your devices, on your array of devices here, we're going to have to go through that whole thing again. So it essentially puts a huge barrier. It's hugely disruptive to the web development workflow as we're accustomed to experiencing it on the desktop. So let's just go over the configuration really quickly. The first thing I want to show you is the Shadow Helper application. And once it's started, you can just minimize it or hide it or whatever and get it out of the way. The next thing I want to show you is the Chrome extension, and when you expand it, you can see a list of all the devices that you have connected. Right now I have 3 devices connected. Then you have the native applications that run on the devices themselves, and here I have a couple of Android devices. This is a Nexus S, this is a Galaxy Nexus, and then a couple of iOS devices here. This is an iPod Touch, and this is obviously an iPad. So let me show you what it looks like to actually pair 2 devices. So I'll start the Shadow application, and it's looking for computers on the network that are running the Shadow Helper application, and it found my computer, which is back here, named Shorty, so I'll select it. And you might not be able to see it because it's really small, but a little green plus is now on top of the Shadow icon in the browser here. And that's telling me that a device is trying to pair, and I need to enter the passcode. So I'll expand it, and I just need to enter this passcode here, which is 326814, hit enter, and the devices are paired, and I'm ready to start testing. Okay, so let's see what it's like to actually do some development and testing using Shadow. I have all my devices connected here, so if I make a change, like I showed you before, and go over to my browser and refresh, then you'll see all of my devices are going to refresh as well. So I'm now able to test all these devices simultaneously. And the workflow is no different than it was when I was just testing on the desktop. Now, of course, you can do more than just refresh your browser. You can also click on links, and all the devices will follow along. And another really big advantage to this kind of development and debugging workflow is that you can actually see how sites look on all these different devices simultaneously. So I'm going to go over to a site, the Boston Globe, which is sort of a famously responsive design. And you can see that I'm getting the desktop layout here, which has 3 columns. I'm getting the tablet layout here, which has 2 columns, and then I'm getting this sort of standard single column phone version. Now I can do more than just inspect my changes and look at my changes on all these devices at the same time. I can also do some remote inspection. So I'm going to open the Shadow menu here, and I'm going to click on this icon here, which is the remote inspection icon for this device called Super Slim, which is my iPad. And I've now connected remotely to it, and I can now inspect these elements remotely. And you can see that the elements are being highlighted here on the device as I mouse over them here in my browser. And I can do more than just inspect them. I can double click and actually change them. So let's add some exclamation marks here, and you'll see them show up here. Let's change this to a way better web, and you can see the changes show up right away. I have some other tools up here, including the console, so I can do something like a little bit of JavaScript here and execute it remotely. So you can see that this is a really powerful workflow. This is the kind of workflow that we're accustomed to having on the desktop, and it's suddenly just expanded to all of my devices. So one of the workflows I showed you earlier was using a tool called LiveReload to make the web development workflow on the desktop even smoother. LiveReload allows you to make a change in your editor and save it and see it reflected immediately in your browser without actually having to Alt-Tab over and hit refresh. So what happens when you combine LiveReload with Adobe Shadow? I'm going to make the same change that I made earlier. I'm going to change the background of this document from blue to gray, and I'm going to hit save. And you can see the change reflected immediately in my browser here. And you can also see the change on my 2 iOS devices here. So let me show that to you again. I'll scroll down here and add the exclamation marks and hit save, and you'll see them right away in my browser, right away on my iOS devices. So it works really well. Now you've probably noticed that the 2 Android devices I have going here are not refreshing. LiveReload uses WebSockets in order to communicate over the network, and we don't have full support for WebSockets on Android yet. So the experience on Android is not quite as good on iOS yet. However, it's still not too bad, because if I Alt-Tab over to my browser without hitting refresh, now you'll see that the 2 Android devices will refresh. And so it's still a little bit better. Using LiveReload, I can still save the step of refreshing for Android. So on iOS devices and on the desktop, I get the changes immediately without having to Alt-Tab and refresh at all. On Android devices, I still have to give the browser focus in order for them to refresh, but I don't actually have to hit refresh. Now, that workflow will get better. Once WebSocket support comes to Android, then LiveReload and Adobe Shadow will integrate perfectly. The last point I want to make about Adobe Shadow is that there's no limit to the number of devices that you can connect. The other day I learned how valuable this is when I was helping to test a new website of ours, html.adobe.com. And I probably have the most devices on the team, so I did some of the testing. And it's a brand new website, all with the most modern web technologies. And so we thought, well, if we're only targeting the most high-end devices, how many devices can that possibly be? Well, it turns out to be a minimum of 8. So in the iOS world, you have the iPhone 4 and the iPhone 4S. You have the iPad 2 and the 3rd generation iPad with the Retina display. In the Android world, you have ice cream sandwich devices, you have gingerbread devices, and you have tablets, say a 7-inch, maybe a 10-inch tablet. So even if you're only targeting the most modern devices, the most high-end devices, you're still looking at testing, if you want to be thorough, on about 8 of them. And if you want to be really thorough, then you might be talking about 10, 11, 12 devices. So being able to connect all these devices, test them all simultaneously, make a tweak and see how that tweak affects all the different devices all at the same time is hugely beneficial. If you want to learn more about Adobe Shadow, I'll put a link in the description of the video, and you can download it for yourself and see if it works for your workflow. Thanks for watching.